What if I told you that a being from another world revealed secrets about Jesus that the church never wanted you to know? The story I'm about to tell you today about a veterinarian who sheltered a mysterious creature will shake in everything you believe about healing faith and the true teachings that have been hidden from humanity for centuries. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just some water and sit back as we begin this journey together. Now prepare yourself for discoveries that could forever change your understanding of the power that exists within you. Cedar Falls, Iowa, November 14th, 1984, 3:22 in the morning. Dr. James Mitchell was leaving his veterinary clinic after another night treating a horse with colic when he spotted a hunched figure near the back of his property, partially hidden behind the stacks of hay. His first reaction was irritation. Probably just another drunk who'd gotten lost walking home from the local bar. At 43 years old, James had spent the last 2 decades caring for rural animals in Iowa, and he'd encountered his share of disoriented people on his property over the years. But for the past 2 years, his patience had been shorter than usual. A progressive autoimmune disease that doctors couldn't diagnose precisely was slowly destroying his immune system, leaving him constantly exhausted and frequently irritable. Great, James muttered to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. Exactly what I need after a 16-hour night. But as he got closer, he realized the person wasn't just drunk. They were clearly injured. There was blood on their clothes, and they were shaking violently, not just from cold, but apparently from pain. Hey, James called out, his irritation quickly being replaced by professional concern. Are you okay? The figure raised their head, and James could see it was well. Initially, he thought it was a man with some kind of congenital deformity. The face had strange proportions, eyes larger than normal, and the skin had an almost translucent, pale quality that could indicate some rare medical condition. Probably escaped from some institution, James thought, approaching carefully. He'd seen similar cases before, people with developmental disabilities who sometimes got lost or ran away from care facilities. You're hurt, James said gently, noticing what appeared to be blood trickling from the person's arm. Let me help you. The person, James still wasn't sure if it was male or female due to the unusual facial features, looked at him with eyes that were strikingly intelligent and expressive despite the unconventional physical appearance. Pain, the person whispered in a voice that had a strange, almost musical quality. Very hurt. For 20 years, James had been guided by one simple principle. When something is hurt and needs help, you help. It doesn't matter if it's an abandoned animal or a person with problems. I'm going to take you inside, James said, offering support. I've got basic medical supplies at the clinic. The person didn't resist when James helped them up, though they were surprisingly light for their height. During the short walk to the clinic, James noticed other peculiarities. The clothes were made of material he didn't recognize, almost like some kind of experimental space-age fabric. And there was a faint but distinctive odor he couldn't identify. Probably some kind of medical experiment gone wrong, James speculated as he settled the person on one of the examination tables. Maybe someone from some experimental university program. But when he began examining the injuries more closely, James discovered something that deeply disturbed him. The wounds didn't look like typical cuts or bruises. They were more like energy burns or something that had been cauterized by extreme heat. How did you hurt yourself like this? James asked as he carefully cleaned one of the wounds. Accident, the person replied, watching James' every movement with intense attention. Machine damaged. James assumed it had been some kind of industrial accident. Over the next 2 hours, he worked methodically to clean and treat the wounds, applying topical antibiotics and bandages. The person was a surprisingly cooperative patient, never complaining about pain, despite some of the treatments being obviously uncomfortable. Do you have somewhere to stay? James asked as he finished the dressings. You should seek proper medical attention in the morning. Cannot go to hospital, the person said. And for the first time, James detected what might be fear in their voice. Please, just safe place to rest. James hesitated. His house was only 5 minutes from the clinic, but taking an injured stranger home wasn't exactly standard medical protocol. On the other hand, the person clearly needed care, and something about their vulnerability touched James' natural compassion. All right, James said finally. I can let you rest here at the clinic for a few hours, but in the morning we'll have to figure out a more permanent situation. It was only during the next 3 days, as James cared for the mysterious person's wounds and began having more extensive conversations, that he gradually realized he wasn't dealing with a human being with deformities. The way the person spoke about technical concepts, their demonstration of knowledge about biological systems that transcended formal medical education, and especially their apparent ability to perceive details about James's medical condition that no one else knew, slowly forced an impossible conclusion. The injured stranger James had rescued wasn't from a medical institution or experimental program. It was something far more extraordinary, and was about to share knowledge about healing that would challenge everything. James thought he knew about medicine, spirituality, and the true teachings that historical figures like Jesus had tried to leave for humanity. Dr. James Mitchell wasn't the type of man who easily accepted limitations imposed by life, but the past 2 years had tested his resilience in ways he never imagined possible. At 43 years old, he had built a solid career as a rural veterinarian in Cedar Falls, Iowa, developing a reputation as one of the most dedicated and competent professionals in the Midwest region. But a progressive and mysterious autoimmune disease was systematically destroying not only his physical health, but also his faith in everything he had learned about medicine and healing. Born into a Lutheran farming family in a small rural town, James had grown up with traditional values of hard work, self-sufficiency, and practical Christian faith. His father, Robert Mitchell, had run a dairy farm for 40 years, and his mother, Mary, had been a nurse at the local clinic before dedicating herself full-time to raising the children. James was always different from the other boys, Mary used to tell neighbors. While they played with toy tractors, he took care of injured animals he found on the property. By age 7, he already knew how to bandage cats that came home hurt. This natural compassion for wounded creatures had guided James since childhood. He had built a small hospital in the family barn where he treated birds with broken wings, abandoned dogs, and any animal that needed care. His parents initially saw this as a phase that would pass, but as James demonstrated real ability for diagnosis and treatment, they began to encourage his interest. During high school, James was one of the top students in his class, especially in biological sciences. His teachers encouraged him to consider human medicine, but James always knew he wanted to work with animals. There was something about the honesty and nonverbal gratitude of animals that attracted him more than the psychological complexity of human patients. And animals don't lie about where it hurts, James explained to his parents when he announced plans to study veterinary medicine. They don't have hidden agendas or try to manipulate diagnosis. It's pure medicine. You see the problem, identify the cause, and work to solve it. After graduating from Iowa State University with distinction in 1960, James completed his residency in rural veterinary medicine, specializing in large animals. He had specifically chosen to work with farmers because he appreciated the culture of hard work and traditional values that had shaped his own upbringing. In 1967, James established his own clinic in Cedar Falls, a rural community where he quickly became an integral part of the local economy. Farmers depended on him to keep their animals healthy, and James took this responsibility seriously, often working emergency calls at all hours of the night. Dr. Mitchell is the kind of veterinarian you call at 3 in the morning when your cow is having birthing problems, and he shows up in 20 minutes without complaining, commented Tom Bradley, a local farmer who had used James's services for more than 15 years. During the 70s, James married Linda Patterson, a local school teacher who shared his Christian values and love for rural life. The marriage was happy for 12 years, but they never had children, a source of private sadness that both carried but rarely discussed openly. Maybe God has other plans for us, Linda used to say when the subject came up. James takes care of so many animals that he's already a father to half the county. The marriage began to deteriorate in the late 70s, not due to dramatic conflicts, but due to growing emotional isolation. James had become increasingly absorbed in his work, using long hours at the clinic as a way to avoid confronting feelings about his incomplete personal life. Linda, in turn, developed a growing interest in church activities and community work that rarely included James. We became polite roommates instead of husband and wife. Linda explained during divorce conversations in 1979, James is a good man, but we're living separate lives in the same house. The divorce was amicable, but left James even more emotionally isolated. He moved to a small house near the clinic and dedicated himself even more intensely to work developing a reputation for being the most dedicated but also loneliest veterinarian in the region. James Mitchell can cure any sick animal local farmers observed, but it seems like he can't cure his own loneliness. During the early years of the 80s, James developed a stable but predictable routine. Work consumed most of his time and energy. Sunday church provided minimal spiritual structure, and he maintained few close personal relationships. It was a functional but not particularly satisfying existence. It was in 1982 that James first noticed symptoms that changed everything. It started with unexplainable fatigue that didn't improve with rest, followed by joint pain that interfered with the demanding physical work of a rural veterinarian. Initially, he attributed the symptoms to natural aging and the stress of solitary work. I probably just need a vacation, James told himself when the symptoms persisted for several weeks. But as the condition worsened over the following months, James was forced to seek medical attention. The initial diagnoses were vague and frustrating: possible arthritis, work-related stress, chronic fatigue syndrome. None of the suggested treatments provided significant relief. During 1983, James consulted specialists at 3 different university hospitals. Tests revealed evidence of abnormal autoimmune activity, but none of the doctors could arrive at a definitive diagnosis or offer effective treatment. It's as if his own immune system is attacking healthy tissue, explained Dr. Richard Stevens, a rheumatologist at the University of Iowa. We can treat symptoms with steroids and anti-inflammatories, but we don't understand the underlying cause. For a man who had spent 20 years diagnosing and treating diseases with scientific precision, modern medicine's inability to identify or treat his own condition was deeply frustrating and shaking to his faith in both science and God. I spend my life healing others, James wrote in a diary he began during the most difficult period of his illness. But I can't heal myself, and apparently neither can any other doctor. During 1984, James's condition continued to deteriorate gradually. Medications provided temporary relief, but with significant side effects that affected his ability to work effectively. He was forced to reduce his work hours and decline some types of emergency calls that required intense physical effort. Dr. Mitchell doesn't seem like himself lately, local farmers observed. He was always thin, but now he looks sick, and he doesn't have the same energy he used to have. James's illness also deepened spiritual questions he had avoided for years. As a lifelong Christian, he struggled to reconcile unexplained suffering with belief in a benevolent and powerful God. Why would God allow someone dedicated to healing others to suffer from an incurable disease, James wondered, during sleepless nights when pain made sleep impossible. It was this combination of professional medical competence, personal experience with the limitations of modern medicine, and spiritual struggle with questions about divine purpose that had prepared James Mitchell for the most transformative encounter of his life. Without knowing it, he had developed exactly the combination of scientific knowledge, personal humility, and spiritual openness that would make him capable of receiving and understanding revelations about healing that transcended both conventional medicine and traditional religious doctrines. On the night of November 14th, 1984, James was ready physically, emotionally, and spiritually to discover discover truths about healing that would change not only his own health, but his fundamental understanding of the nature of disease. The power of applied faith in the true teachings that figures like Jesus had tried to share with humanity. During the 3 days that followed, rescuing the injured stranger, James found himself in a situation that progressively challenged his ability to maintain rational explanations for what he was observing. What had begun as a simple act of medical compassion was transforming into an experience that would force James to question everything he thought he knew about reality, medicine, and spirituality. The first night passed relatively normally. James set up the stranger on an improvised bed in the clinic's recovery room, checked his dressings, and left water and some crackers within reach. The patient seemed to mainly need rest, and James respected that, returning home with plans to check on the situation in the morning. Probably someone from some experimental program who had an accident. James repeated to himself as he tried to sleep. The wounds are strange, but I've seen chemical burns that looked equally bizarre. But when he returned the following morning, James found something that deeply disturbed him. The injuries he had treated, wounds that should take at least a week to show significant signs of healing, were visibly better. Not just a little better, but dramatically improved, as if days of healing had occurred during a single night. This isn't possible, James murmured, carefully examining the dressings. Healing doesn't happen this way. The stranger watched James examine the wounds with eyes that seemed too large and too expressive for any human condition James knew. Thank you for care, the stranger said through that musically strange voice. Your touch has healing quality. My touch, James repeated, confused. I just cleaned wounds and applied antibiotics. Nothing special. You heal with more than medications, the stranger observed. You heal with intention, with, how do you say, compassion. During the second day, James had more extensive conversations with his mysterious patient while changing dressings and monitoring healing progress that continued to defy medical explanation. The stranger demonstrated knowledge about biology and medicine that was unsettling. How do you know so much about healing processes? James asked after the stranger made technical observations about cellular regeneration that James wouldn't expect from someone without formal medical education. I study biological systems, the stranger replied. It is my specialization. I observe how different beings handle damage and repair. What kind of studies, James pressed? Do you work at some university research institute? The stranger hesitated, as if carefully considering his response. I come from institution very distant, he said finally, place where we understand processes that your medicine is still discovering. During the third day, James could no longer ignore the accumulating evidence that he wasn't dealing with an ordinary human being. The healing rate was just the beginning. The stranger never seemed to eat, though James offered food regularly. He didn't seem to sleep normally. James would find him in the same position, eyes open, apparently in a deep meditative state. Even more disturbing, the stranger began making observations about James's medical condition that no one else knew. Your immune system is attacking healthy tissue because it carries memories of unprocessed emotional trauma, the stranger said casually while James checked his dressings. James stopped completely. How can you know about my autoimmune disease? I didn't mention that to you. I perceive patterns of dissonance in your energetic systems, the stranger explained, as if he were discussing the weather. Repressed anger against yourself is manifesting as autoimmune attack. That's ridiculous, James protested. Autoimmune diseases are caused by genetic and environmental factors, not by emotions. Where did you learn this separation between physical body and emotional state? The stranger asked gently. The question caught James off guard. Throughout his medical education, he had been taught to treat physical symptoms as entities separate from psychological or emotional factors. It's basic medicine, James replied. But his voice carried less conviction than his words. In my place of origin, the stranger said carefully, we understand that separation between physical and emotional is illusion. Physical body is always reflection of consciousness states. It was during the third night that James was finally forced to confront the impossibility of his situation. He was checking the final dressings when the stranger did something that eliminated any possibility of conventional explanation. James, the stranger, said, and this time his voice seemed to come from within James's own mind. Are you ready to understand truth about my nature? James felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The voice had been clear, distinct, but definitely telepathic. You spoke inside my head, James whispered. Telepathic communication is natural between conscious beings when barriers of fear are removed. The stranger explained now using both physical and mental voice simultaneously. Who are you? James asked, finally asking the question he had avoided for 3 days. I am traveler from place very distant, the stranger replied with complete honesty. My craft suffered damage, and I was forced to land in this location. You found me and offered care without expecting anything in return. Kraft James repeated weakly, what you would call space vehicle, the stranger confirmed. I come from star system that your astronomy has not yet discovered. James sat heavily in a nearby chair, trying to process information that challenged everything he believed about reality. You're an alien, James said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact he could no longer deny. I prefer visitor, the stranger said, with what might have been humor. And you, James Mitchell, rural veterinarian of Cedar Falls, Iowa, are the first human in many years to offer me care without fear or hidden agenda. Why are you telling me this? James asked. Why reveal your nature? Because you demonstrated qualities that are rare in your species. Genuine compassion combined with open mind for possibilities beyond conventional. And because you need knowledge that I can share. What kind of knowledge? The stranger who had introduced himself as Kyle looked at James with an expression that mixed compassion with something that could be cosmic purpose. Knowledge about true healing that your own Jesus tried to teach, but which was misunderstood and distorted by later religious organizations. Knowledge that can not only heal your autoimmune disease, but transform your understanding about divine nature that exists within each conscious being. James felt something move within him, a mixture of fear, hope, and curiosity that transcended anything he had experienced before. Jesus, James repeated, you know about Jesus. I know many great masters who visited Earth during your species' history, Kale confirmed. And I can teach you how to apply principles that he demonstrated not as religious dogma, but as practical healing technology that every human possesses the capacity to access. It was only the beginning of revelations that would completely transform James's understanding of medicine, spirituality, and the true teachings that had been preserved not in religious texts, but in the very biological structure of every human being. Editor, during the week that followed Cale's initial revelations about his true nature, James found himself immersed in conversations that would fundamentally challenge everything he thought he knew about medicine, spirituality, and especially about the true teachings of Jesus Christ. The revelations Cale shared were not theological abstractions, but practical demonstrations of healing principles that transcended anything James had learned during his medical education. Before sharing knowledge about healing, Cale said during his 5th morning at the clinic, you must understand why Jesus really came to earth and what his healing demonstrations were trying to teach. James, who had grown up in the Lutheran Christian tradition, thought he knew Jesus' story well. But Cale's perspectives were radically different from any religious interpretation he had encountered. Jesus did not come to establish religion or be worshipped as distant figure, Cale explained. He came to demonstrate natural capabilities that exist within each human being. Each miracle he performed was demonstration of consciousness technologies that any person can learn to access. Consciousness technologies. James repeated, struggling to understand the concept. Specific methods of using focused consciousness and emotional energy to reorganize matter at molecular level. Cale elaborated. What you call miracles are simply applications of natural laws that your science has not yet discovered. During the following days, Kyle demonstrated concepts that forced James to completely rethink his notions about physical reality and human possibility. When Jesus healed people, Kyle explained he was not channeling external supernatural power. He was activating self-healing capacities that already existed within each person, removing energetic blockages that prevented natural functioning of biological systems. What kinds of blockages? James asked, thinking of his own autoimmune condition. Primarily unprocessed emotional energy that crystallizes in physical tissues, Kale replied. Anger, resentment, guilt, fear, especially when directed against oneself, create dissonance that interferes with natural harmony of biological systems. Kyle explained that Jesus had taught a specific method of healing based on two fundamental principles: genuine forgiveness and unconditional love, not as abstract moral concepts, but as precise energetic frequencies that could reorganize cellular structures. When Jesus said your sins are forgiven, Kale revealed he was not offering religious absolution. He was instructing the person to release patterns of guilt and self-remation that were causing physical manifestations of disease. This perspective was revolutionary for James, who had been taught to see forgiveness as moral obligation rather than practical medical tool. How can forgiveness have real physical effect? James questioned his scientific mind, demanding explainable mechanisms. Emotions are specific energetic frequencies, Kale explained patiently. Resentment vibrates at frequency that creates chronic muscle tension, inflammation, and eventually autoimmune disorders. Unconditional love vibrates at frequency that promotes cellular regeneration, optimized immune function, and systemic harmony. Kyle demonstrated how Jesus had used specific techniques that combine focused intention, conscious breathing, and direction of emotional energy to facilitate instant healing. When Jesus touched sick people, Kyle said he was transmitting not just compassion, but specific energetic frequency of unconditional love that reset biological systems to original health patterns. Even more extraordinary, Kale revealed that Jesus had tried to teach these techniques to his disciples and followers, but that the knowledge had been misunderstood and eventually suppressed by religious organizations that preferred to keep people dependent on external authority. Jesus' original teachings emphasized that kingdom of God is within you. Kale explained he was literally teaching that divine healing power resides within each person, not in external institutions or authority figures. During a particular demonstration, Kale taught James how to apply these principles to his own autoimmune condition. Your disease is rooted in deep anger against yourself. Kale diagnosed anger for not being able to save your marriage, anger for feeling isolated, anger for not being able to heal yourself using conventional medical methods. James recognized the truth in these observations, although he had never consciously articulated them. How can I release this anger? James asked. Through specific process that Jesus taught, Kale replied. First, you must genuinely forgive yourself for all perceived forms of failure. Second, you must direct unconditional love toward your own body, treating it as sacred creation instead of defective machine. Kyle taught James practical exercises that combined focused meditation, specific affirmations, and breathing techniques that consciously directed healing energy through bodily systems. Place hands over area of greatest inflammation, Kyle instructed. Breathe deeply and visualize golden light flowing through your palms. Most importantly, feel genuine gratitude for your body and its attempts to heal itself even when methods are creating discomfort. During the first attempt, James experienced a sensation of warmth and tingling that was unlike anything he had felt before. Now Kale continued, mentally forgive your body for being sick. Forgive yourself for all judgments you have made against yourself and declare intention to work in loving partnership with natural healing systems. Kyle revealed that Jesus had demonstrated these principles repeatedly, but that witnesses interpreted the results as supernatural powers instead of natural human capacities being activated through specific techniques. When Jesus said have faith, he was not talking about blind belief. Kale explained he was instructing people to trust in inherent divine capacities that exist within each conscious being. The most profound revelation came when Kale explained why these teachings had been distorted or suppressed throughout history. Religious organizations discovered it was easier to control people by teaching that divine power exists only outside them. Kale said if people understood that each one possesses direct capacity for healing in connection with divine external religious authority would become unnecessary. Kyle also revealed that Jesus had not been unique in teaching these principles. Many other masters throughout history had demonstrated similar capabilities, but that specific knowledge about how to access these capabilities had been consistently hidden or distorted. The truth that Jesus tried to share, Kyle concluded, is that each person is individual aspect of divine consciousness, equipped with all necessary capacities for healing growth and direct connection with universal source. No intermediary is necessary, no priest, no church, no religious dogma. The mission Kale revealed for James was simultaneously simple and revolutionary. Apply these principles to his own healing, and through example, demonstrate that the methods Jesus taught were not historical relics, but practical technologies available to any person willing to transcend limitations of conventional thinking. When you heal your own disease using these principles, Kyle said you will become living bridge between modern medicine and ancient wisdom, demonstrating that science and spirituality are complementary aspects of single reality. James understood he was being invited not just to heal himself, but to rediscover and apply teachings that could completely transform humanity's approach to health disease and the potential for self-healing that Jesus had tried to share 2,000 years before. Editor. Despite the extraordinary demonstrations he had witnessed and the profound revelations about the true teachings of Jesus, James Mitchell faced weeks of deep doubt and internal resistance that threatened to completely erode his ability to accept and apply the healing principles Kale had shared. The implications of what he had learned were so vast and challenging that his scientific mind and traditional religious formation desperately struggled to find conventional explanations that could preserve his previous views about medicine and spirituality. The first wave of resistance emerged the day after Kale's departure when members of his species came to rescue him discreetly during the early morning hours. James woke to find the clinic empty with no physical signs that his extraordinary visitor had been there, except for memories that seemed increasingly unreal in the morning light. It was probably some kind of drug-induced hallucination, James muttered to himself as he examined the room where Kale had recovered. The steroids I'm taking can cause complex psychotic episodes. This medical explanation offered the comfort of familiarity. James had seen animal patients react strangely to medications, developing behaviors that seemed almost supernatural until doses were adjusted. Perhaps his own experience was simply a complex pharmacological side effect. The second wave of doubt was even more disturbing. James began questioning the religious implications of accepting that Jesus had taught healing technologies instead of performing supernatural divine miracles. If Jesus was just a teacher of natural techniques, James wondered, during a particularly difficult morning, what does that mean about his divinity, about salvation, about the entire foundation of Christian faith? James had grown up believing that Jesus was God's only son, whose ability to perform miracles proved his special divine nature. Kyle's suggestion that anyone could learn to access similar capabilities seemed to diminish Christ's unique status in ways that made James feel guilty just for considering. The third wave of resistance involved practical questions about applying the principles Kyle had taught. James tried several times to reproduce the healing exercises he had learned, but without Kyle's presence and guidance, the techniques seemed inadequate, and their results were inconsistent at best. Genuine forgiveness and unconditional love, James repeated to himself during a particularly frustrating attempt. How am I supposed to feel unconditional love for a body that's systematically self-destructing? The exercises that had seemed natural and effective in Kyle's presence now felt forced and artificial. James questioned whether he had simply imagined the sensations of warmth and tingling he had experienced during the original demonstrations. The fourth wave of doubt was perhaps the most fundamental. James began questioning whether he really wanted Cale's revelations to be true. Accepting that he possessed inherent capacity for self-healing would mean taking complete responsibility for his medical condition instead of being a victim of random disease beyond his control. If I can really heal myself through forgiveness and love, James reflected during one of his sleepless nights, does that mean I'm responsible for being sick in the first place? Does it mean I created my own disease through anger and resentment? This line of thinking led to feelings of guilt and self-rumination that ironically worsened his physical symptoms, creating a vicious cycle that seemed to confirm his inability to apply healing principles effectively. The fifth wave of resistance involved fear of the social and professional consequences of accepting or applying the knowledge Cale had shared. James lived in a conservative rural community where people valued traditional medicine and religious orthodoxy. If I start talking about Jesus as a teacher of natural healing techniques instead of divine savior, James worried I'll lose both medical credibility and church standing. I might even lose patients if they think I've become some kind of eccentric healer. James imagined scenarios where veterinary colleagues would question his professional competence, where church members would consider him influenced by heretical doctrines, where his reputation as a trustworthy medical professional would be destroyed by association with ideas most would consider unscientific. The sixth wave of doubt involved questions about the nature of reality itself and the reliability of his perceptions. James had always prided himself on being rational, scientific, and skeptical about extraordinary claims. The experience with Cale forced him to question not just medical knowledge, but his ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. Maybe the isolation and stress of chronic illness have affected my mental stability more than I realized, James considered during moments of particular self-questing. Maybe I need psychiatric help instead of alien healing techniques. This line of thinking led him to question not just the experience with Cale, but also his competence to continue practicing veterinary medicine if he couldn't trust his own perceptions. The seventh wave of resistance was the most personally painful. James began confronting deep anger and resentment he had carried for years without conscious recognition. The forgiveness exercises revealed layers of emotional pain he had suppressed through compulsive work and emotional isolation. I don't want to forgive Linda for leaving our marriage, James admitted to himself during a moment of brutal honesty. I don't want to forgive my parents for pressuring me into a profession that left me lonely. And I definitely don't want to forgive God for allowing me to get sick when I've dedicated my life to healing others. Recognizing these resentments was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. James realized he had built his identity partly around being a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Releasing that identity would mean completely rebuilding his sense of who he was. During the lowest point of these doubts, approximately 3 weeks after Cale's departure, James seriously considered seeking psychiatric hospitalization, convinced he had suffered some kind of complex psychotic episode. Maybe it would be better to forget this whole strange experience, James thought during a particularly difficult morning. Continue with conventional medical treatments. Accept that some diseases are incurable and stop fantasizing about miraculous cures. But even as he tried to convince himself and to abandon the principles he had learned, James discovered he could no longer ignore connections between his emotional states and physical symptoms. It was as if the conversations with Cale had permanently removed veils that had previously prevented him from perceiving relationships between mind and body. It was during this period of greatest resistance that James experienced a series of events that would force him to confront the reality of the principles he had learned, regardless of his intellectual doubts about accepting them. The demonstration that would definitively dispel all of James's doubts about the reality of the healing principles he had learned began during an unexpected medical emergency 4 weeks after Cale's departure. James was responding to a routine call at the Morrison farm when he found himself face to face with a situation that would test not only his veterinary skills, but his willingness to apply the knowledge he had received about energy healing. It was a cold December morning when Tom Morrison called in complete panic. His prize mare Belle had suffered some kind of collapse during the night and was near death when he found her in the morning. "Dr. Mitchell, please come quickly," Tom pleaded over the phone. "Belle is lying in the stable, can barely breathe, and I don't know what to do." James arrived at the Morrison farm to find a situation that was both familiar and desperate. Belle, a 15-year-old quarter horse who had been Tom's companion for over a decade, was clearly in the final stages of some severe systemic condition. "When did you find her like this?" James asked while conducting his initial examination. "Around 6 this morning," Tom replied, tears in his eyes. "Last night she seemed normal, but when I went to check this morning, she was down and could barely move her head." James conducted a complete veterinary examination, checking vital signs, reflexes, and physical indicators of various possible conditions. What he discovered was baffling. All of Belle's body systems seemed to be failing simultaneously, but without any identifiable cause. "I don't understand," James murmured after 20 minutes of intensive diagnosis. "Blood pressure is critically low. Breathing is labored, but I can't find evidence of poisoning, infection, or physical trauma." Tom Morrison had been James's client for over 15 years and completely trusted his professional judgment. "Is there anything you can do?" Tom asked desperately. "Belle is well, she's family. I can't just let her die if there's any chance." James looked at the dying mare and felt that familiar sensation of helplessness he had experienced with his own medical condition. Conventional veterinary methods offered no solutions for a situation where all systems were failing without an identifiable cause. It was at that moment that James remembered Cale's words about applying healing intention and focused emotional energy. On an impulse he couldn't rationally explain, James decided to try applying the principles he had learned. "Tom," James said carefully, "I'm going to try an unconventional approach. It might seem strange, but do you trust me?" "Of course, Dr. Mitchell," Tom replied without hesitation. "Do anything you think might help." James gently placed his hands on Belle's neck and closed his eyes, trying to reproduce the state of consciousness he had experienced during Cale's demonstrations. Instead of focusing only on physical symptoms, he directed his attention to the energetic quality emanating from the mare. Immediately, James perceived something he hadn't noticed during the conventional physical examination. Belle wasn't just physically ill. She was carrying a type of profound emotional sadness that seemed to be affecting her biological systems. "Belle," James whispered, keeping his hands in gentle contact. "What's wrong, girl? What's hurting you beyond the physical for reasons he couldn't explain?" James began to perceive impressions that seemed to come directly from the mare's consciousness. Images of other horses, sensations of loss, feelings of abandonment and confusion. Tom, James said without opening his eyes. "Has Belle lost any companion recently? Another horse or animal she was close to?" Tom was silent for a moment, then replied with an emotional voice. "Yes, actually. We had to put down her colt Duke 3 weeks ago. He broke his leg so severely there was nothing we could do. Belle has been different since then." James understood instantly. Belle was dying of grief. Literally, the loss of Duke had created such severe emotional trauma that it was manifesting as physical systemic collapse. Following instincts that seemed to come from a place deeper than veterinary knowledge, James applied the principles Cale had demonstrated. He directed pure, compassionate energy through his hands to Belle, visualizing healing light, enveloping not just her physical body but also the emotional pain that was causing her symptoms. "Belle," James said softly, "Duke is fine where he is now. He doesn't want you to suffer because of him. He wants you to keep living, keep being a source of joy for Tom." For the next 20 minutes, James maintained physical contact with Belle while applying a combination of focused healing intention and empathic communication that is transcended conventional veterinary methods. Gradually, he felt the mare's energetic quality begin to change. "My God," Tom whispered as Belle's breathing began to stabilize. "She's getting better. How is this possible?" Over the next hour, James witnessed a recovery that defied conventional medical explanation. Bell not only stabilized, but gradually regained enough strength to stand and even accept some water. Dr. Mitchell Tom said with obvious admiration, "In 15 years, I've never seen anything like it." "What exactly did you do, Ian?" James struggled to find an explanation that wouldn't sound completely unscientific. Sometimes, James said carefully, physical illnesses have emotional components that conventional medicine doesn't recognize. Belle was suffering so much emotionally from Duke's loss that it was affecting her physical systems. The second demonstration came 3 days later, when James applied similar principles to his own condition. Inspired by his success with Belle, he dedicated an entire morning to the forgiveness and self-healing exercises Cale had taught him. Instead of approaching the exercises as desperate attempts at impossible healing, James treated them as legitimate scientific experiments. He carefully documented pain levels, energy, and function before and after focused healing sessions. If emotions can affect horses physically, James reasoned they certainly can affect humans too. And during his first genuine forgiveness session, James confronted specific resentments he had carried for years. He forgave Linda for leaving the marriage, forgave his parents for career pressures, forgave doctors for failing to diagnose his condition, and most difficult of all, forgave himself for feeling like a failure. To his surprise, James experienced immediate physical relief after releasing emotional burdens he had unconsciously carried. Muscle tension he had accepted as normal began to diminish, and energy he hadn't felt in months began to return. The third demonstration was even more dramatic. James began applying the principles he had learned with other animals brought to his clinic, discovering that an approach combining conventional medical treatment with attention to emotional and energetic factors consistently produced better results. It's as if the animals respond not just to medications, James observed in notes he began keeping, but also to the quality of intention and compassion I bring to their treatment. The most convincing demonstration came when James was called to an emergency at the Petersonen farm, where a newborn calf had been rejected by its mother and was failing to thrive despite adequate nutritional care. Applying a combination of traditional veterinary care with the energetic techniques he had learned, James not only helped the calf recover physically, but facilitated an emotional reconnection between mother and child that resulted in complete healing of their relationship. Dr. Mitchell said, Bill Peterson, after witnessing the extraordinary recovery, "I don't know how to explain it, but it seems like you've developed some kind of special gift for understanding what animals really need." When these demonstrations accumulated over a period of several weeks, James could no longer deny the reality of the principles he had learned. He had consistently facilitated types of healing that transcended results possible through conventional medicine alone. Kyle was right. James finally admitted to himself during a quiet night at his clinic. True healing involves much more than treating physical symptoms. It involves recognizing and addressing the emotional and energetic aspects of illness that modern medicine ignores. Most importantly, James had directly experienced significant improvement in his own autoimmune condition through consistent application of the forgiveness and unconditional love principles he had learned. With all his doubts definitively dispelled by the consistent demonstrations of the effectiveness of the healing principles he had learned, James was ready to receive even more profound revelations that would completely redefine his understanding of medicine, spirituality, and the true nature of the teachings that Jesus had tried to share with humanity. These revelations came unexpectedly during a night when James was meditating in his clinic and felt a familiar presence approaching. Not physically, but through a subtle telepathic communication he immediately recognized. James Mitchell came Cale's familiar mental transmission, crossing cosmic distances to reach him. "You have shown remarkable courage in applying the principles I shared. Now you are ready for deeper truths about the nature of healing and the real mission Jesus tried to fulfill on earth." The first profound revelation concerned Jesus' true identity and why he had come specifically to earth during that historical period. Jesus was not the unique son of a distant God. Cale transmitted but one of many consciousness masters who incarnate periodically to elevate the spiritual understanding of developing civilizations. He came during a time when humanity was ready to learn about the inherent divine capabilities that exist within every person. James learned that Jesus was part of a cosmic network of evolved beings who monitored and assisted the development of conscious species throughout the universe, intervening when civilizations were ready to make significant evolutionary leaps. Jesus' mission, Cale explained, was to demonstrate and teach specific technologies of healing and manifestation that could accelerate human spiritual evolution. Each miracle he performed was a practical demonstration of capabilities that any person can develop through proper understanding. The second profound revelation related to the real nature of what Christians call Jesus's sacrifice and why his death had been necessary to complete his mission. Jesus did not die to pay for humanity's sins, Kyle revealed. He died to demonstrate that consciousness survives physical death and that unconditional love can transcend any form of suffering or trauma. His resurrection was the final demonstration of the healing principles he had taught. James understood that the crucifixion and resurrection had been practical demonstrations of more advanced consciousness technologies, proving that vital energy could overcome extreme physical damage, and that death was merely a transition between states of being, not the end of existence. The third profound revelation was about future events that would completely transform humanity's approach to medicine and healing during the coming decades. In the next generations, Cale transmitted, human medicine will rediscover the principles Jesus demonstrated. Doctors will learn to work with energy fields, emotions as causal factors in physical disease, and the power of focused intention to facilitate healing. What you consider alternative medicine will become mainstream. James saw through telepathic transmissions glimpses of a future where hospitals included meditation rooms, where doctors were trained in energetic techniques, and where treatment protocols addressed spiritual and emotional aspects of disease as essential elements of healing. The fourth profound revelation concerned the specific role that people like James would play during the transition from conventional medicine to integrated approaches that honored both science and spirituality. Medical professionals who rediscover the spiritual dimensions of healing, Cale revealed, will serve as bridges between old paradigms based on mind-body separation and new paradigms based on holistic medicine. You will demonstrate through example that scientific competence and spiritual wisdom are complementary. James understood that he had been prepared not only to heal his own condition, but to serve as a pioneer of a new medical era that would integrate technical knowledge with understanding of the energetic and consciousness dimensions of health. The fifth profound revelation was about the deliberate suppression of Jesus' original teachings by later religious organizations and how true knowledge had been preserved in esoteric traditions. Religious leaders discovered it was easier to control people by teaching dependence on external authority. Cale explained Jesus' teachings about inherent divine capabilities were systematically removed or distorted because they threatened established power structures. Carr. James learned that authentic knowledge about the healing methods Jesus had taught had been secretly preserved by groups like the Essenes Gnostics and other mystical traditions that maintained the original wisdom despite official persecution. The sixth profound revelation related to the nature of autoimmune diseases specifically and why they were becoming epidemic in modern civilization. Autoimmune diseases are physical manifestations of conflict between soul and personality. Kyle transmitted, they occur when a person lives in contradiction to their authentic purpose, when self-concept is based on external expectations rather than inner truth. James discovered that his own condition had been the result of years of living a life that didn't honor his deepest spiritual needs. Emotional isolation, exclusive focus on technical aspects of medicine, and denial of the subtler dimensions of healing that his soul wanted to explore. The seventh profound revelation was about larger cosmic events that were influencing planetary spiritual awakening and why the current timing was critical for rediscovering principles of spiritual healing. Earth is passing through a galactic energy field that accelerates consciousness evolution, Kale explained. During the coming decades, more people will naturally develop sensitivities to energetic dimensions of existence. Those who integrate spiritual knowledge with practical competence will serve as guides during the transition. The final and most extraordinary revelation concerned the fundamental nature of reality and how expanded understanding would completely transform human concepts about health, disease, and potential for self-healing. Physical reality, Kyle transmitted with profound solemnity, is a dimensional school where consciousness learns to manifest through collaboration between intention and matter. Disease is not punishment or random accident, but an opportunity for the soul to learn specific lessons about love, forgiveness, and reconnection with divine nature. James understood that every health challenge he faced was an opportunity to develop specific spiritual capacities: compassion through suffering, humility through limitation, faith through uncertainty, and unconditional love through acceptance of imperfection. When you apply the principles Jesus taught, Kyle concluded, you are not just healing the physical body, but directly participating in the evolution of your own consciousness and contributing to the collective awakening of all humanity. When these extraordinary revelations finally ended, James Mitchell was no longer simply a veterinarian who had learned some alternative healing techniques. He had become an awakened healer, consciously participating in the most sacred project possible, the rediscovery and application of the knowledge Jesus had tried to share about the inherent divine nature that exists within every conscious being. He understood that his journey through autoimmune disease had been specific preparation for understanding and teaching others about the power of self-healing that is available when we remove emotional blockages and operate from genuine love for ourselves and all life. With the profound revelations about Jesus' true teachings completely integrated into his consciousness, James Mitchell underwent an internal transformation that fundamentally redefined not only how he perceived medicine and healing, but how he experienced every aspect of his existence as a healer and spiritual being. This metamorphosis didn't happen all at once, but unfolded gradually over the following months, each day bringing new layers of understanding that brought him ever closer to his true nature as a channel for the healing energies that Jesus had demonstrated. The first and most profound transformation occurred in his relationship with his own autoimmune disease. Before Kale's revelations, James had seen his condition as an enemy to be defeated through medications and external treatments. Now it had transformed into a sacred teacher that was guiding him toward deeper understandings about the connection between consciousness and physical health. I'm not fighting against my disease, James reflected during one of his morning meditations. I'm learning from it. Each symptom is a messenger teaching me about aspects of my emotional and spiritual life that need attention and healing. This new perspective completely transformed his approach to self-care. Instead of simply taking medications to suppress symptoms, James began using each episode of inflammation as an opportunity to examine emotional states, thought patterns, and relationships that might be contributing to physical disharmony. The second significant transformation was in the development of a consistent and refined ability to perceive energetic and emotional dimensions of disease, both in animals and in his own experience. James discovered he could perceive not just physical symptoms, but underlying energetic imbalances that often preceded physical manifestations by days or weeks. It's as if I've developed new senses, James wrote in a journal he began keeping to document his experiences. I can feel when an animal is carrying an emotional trauma, perceive when an owner is projecting anxiety that affects their animal's health, and detect my own energetic imbalances before they manifest as physical symptoms. This expanded perception allowed him to address health problems preventively and holistically, working with energetic and emotional causes beyond simply treating physical manifestations. The third transformation was in the development of a natural ability to channel healing energy through his hands in focused intention. James discovered that when he worked from genuine love and unconditional compassion, His hands literally transmitted frequencies that promoted healing at cellular levels. It's not that I've developed supernatural powers, James explained to himself when trying to understand these capabilities. It's more like I've remembered how to access natural abilities that all humans possess, but that have been suppressed by education that separates science from spirituality. This ability manifested in remarkably practical ways. Animals he touched with healing intention showed accelerated recovery. Wounds he treated with a combination of medical care and compassionate energy healed more quickly and with fewer complications than would be expected based solely on conventional veterinary protocols. The fourth significant transformation was in the development of a conscious and continuous connection with what he secretly thought of as Christ consciousness, direct access to the same principles and energies that Jesus had demonstrated during his ministry on earth. Jesus wasn't a distant historical figure, James realized during one of his deepest meditations. He was a demonstration of potential that exists within every person. When I apply the principles he taught, I'm accessing the same source of healing power he channeled. This connection provided him with access to intuitive guidance about treatments, deep insights into each patient's specific needs, and the ability to maintain compassion and hope even in the most challenging medical situations. The fifth transformation was in the development of an ability to see connections between individual healing and larger patterns of spiritual awakening. James began to understand viscerally how each act of healing he facilitated contributed to the consciousness evolution of all humanity. Every animal I heal, every moment of relief I provide, every demonstration of unconditional love, James understood, creates energetic ripples that extend far beyond the immediate situation. I'm participating in the planetary rediscovery of healing principles that Jesus tried to teach. This expanded perspective gave his work a sense of cosmic purpose that transformed even the most routine cases into sacred opportunities of service. The sixth transformation was in the development of a completely new relationship with prayer and spiritual practice. James discovered that his most effective form of prayer wasn't petition to an external God, but conscious alignment with healing energies that flowed through him when he operated from unconditional love. True prayer, James realized, isn't asking God to change external circumstances, but consciously opening to channel divine love that can transform any situation from within. The seventh transformation was in the development of a natural ability to inspire similar awakening in others through his example and transform presence. Without making any deliberate effort to teach or convert people, James discovered that clients and colleagues often experience shifts in their own relationship with health and spirituality after interacting with him. There's something different about Dr. Mitchell lately. Local farmers commented, he was always competent, but now he has a quality of presence that makes you feel better just being around him, and animals respond to him in an almost magical way. The eighth transformation was in the development of a harmonious integration between scientific medical competence and spiritual healing wisdom. James discovered that his expanded abilities didn't make him less effective in technical aspects of veterinary medicine, but actually amplified his competence in ways that surprised even him. Spirituality hasn't made me less scientific, James reflected. It's made me more scientific in ways that transcend the limitations of conventional medical paradigm. I can still use all the technical skills I developed, but now I have access to additional dimensions of diagnosis and treatment. The ninth and most profound transformation was in the development of a direct experiential understanding of his nature as an individual channel for the same healing energies that Jesus had demonstrated. James didn't just intellectually believe he possessed inherent divine abilities. He experienced this reality as a natural and continuous aspect of his awakened consciousness. I'm not James Mitchell, who has a spiritual connection to healing. James understood with complete clarity. I am divine consciousness expressing itself through the function of James Mitchell to rediscover and demonstrate the healing principles Jesus taught. My personal identity is a temporary instrument for eternal service. All these transformations integrated to create in James Mitchell a unique presence in the field of veterinary medicine, a professional who operated with exceptional technical competence while radiating qualities of consciousness that facilitated healing on levels that transcended conventional medical protocols. His clinic became a center of healing where animals not only received competent medical treatment, but experienced an environment of unconditional love that accelerated recovery and often facilitated healing of emotional traumas that conventional medicine didn't even recognize. James had truly become a bridge between medical worlds, demonstrating that it was possible to honor both scientific rigor and the spiritual wisdom that Jesus had tried to share about the divine nature of true healing. With his internal transformations deeply consolidated, James Mitchell developed a revolutionary understanding of reality that completely redefined his perception of medicine spirituality, Jesus' true teachings, and the fundamental purpose of human existence on Earth. This new perspective wasn't merely philosophical, but a lived and practical perception that influenced every aspect of his existence and prepared him to serve as a bridge between conventional medicine and spiritual healing wisdom. The first aspect of his new understanding related to the true nature of disease and how it served a specific function in human spiritual development. James came to understand that illnesses weren't random accidents or divine punishments, but precisely calibrated opportunities for consciousness growth and awakening of latent capabilities. Dees is a teacher in disguise, James reflected during one of his morning meditations at the clinic. Each medical condition carries specific lessons about aspects of our spiritual nature that need to be developed. Compassion through suffering, humility through limitation, faith through uncertainty. This understanding allowed him to see his own autoimmune disease not as misfortune, but as a catalyst that had been necessary to force him to transcend the limitations of conventional medical thinking and discover deeper dimensions of healing. The second aspect of his new understanding involved a transformed perception of prayer and how it functioned as practical healing technology rather than petition to an external divinity. James understood that effective prayer was conscious alignment with specific energetic frequencies that could reorganize matter at the molecular level. Jesus wasn't praying to an external God when he healed people. James realized he was consciously aligning with divine energies that flowed through him, demonstrating that every person has direct access to the same healing power. This perspective completely transformed his approach to both work and personal life, converting every moment of compassionate service into a form of active prayer. The third aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of forgiveness and how it operated as a specific medical tool rather than an abstract moral obligation. James discovered that genuine forgiveness released crystallized emotional energy that had been stored in physical tissues, allowing restoration of normal cellular function. When Jesus said, "Your sins are forgiven," before healing someone, James understood. He was instructing the person to release energetic patterns of guilt and self-rumination that were causing the physical manifestation of disease. The fourth aspect of his new understanding involved a profound perception of unconditional love and how it functioned as a real energetic frequency that could alter biological structures. James understood that love wasn't merely emotion, but a fundamental force of the universe with measurable properties and specific physical effects. Unconditional love is the most potent medicine available, James reflected, because it operates on a frequency that automatically aligns biological systems with patterns of perfect health. This realization explained why his compassionate presence facilitated accelerated healing in animals, and why the techniques he had learned were effective, regardless of the specific condition being treated. The fifth aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of Jesus' resurrection and how it demonstrated human possibilities that transcended perceived limitations of biology. James understood that the resurrection hadn't been a unique supernatural event, but a demonstration of capabilities that any person could develop through proper understanding. Jesus demonstrated that consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. James understood when consciousness operates from complete unconditional love, it can literally reorganize or even recreate physical structures. The sixth aspect of his new understanding involved an understanding of future technology and how medicine would evolve to integrate the principles Jesus had demonstrated. James glimpsed possibilities where medical devices would amplify natural healing abilities rather than replace them. Future medicine will combine technological precision with spiritual wisdom. James realized doctors will be trained in both energetic diagnosis and technical procedures. The seventh aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of church and religious organizations versus authentic spirituality. James understood that Jesus had never intended to establish institutions, but to awaken individual divine capabilities that would make external religious authority unnecessary. True Christianity, James realized, isn't worship of Jesus as an external figure, but practical application of the principles he demonstrated to awaken the inner Christ that exists within every person. The eighth aspect of his new understanding involved a perception of the purpose of human life on Earth and how each person served a specific function in planetary consciousness evolution. James understood that there were no coincidences in life experiences. Every challenge and opportunity was part of a precisely designed curriculum for spiritual development. We are all here to learn specific aspects of unconditional love. James understood every profession, every relationship, every health challenge is an opportunity to develop specific spiritual capabilities. The ninth aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of time and how spiritual perspective transformed the experience of past, present, and future. James discovered that when he operated from unconditional love, temporal limitations seemed to dissolve, allowing access to wisdom that transcended linear experience. Time is a construction of limited consciousness. James observed, when we align with divine love, we access eternal wisdom that has always existed and always will exist. The tenth and most profound aspect of his new understanding related to the nature of reality itself and how spiritual understanding revealed that separation between self and universe was illusion. James understood that every act of healing was an expression of the fundamental unity that connected all consciousness. There is no real separation between healer and healed. James understood with complete clarity. When I heal an animal or person, I am healing an aspect of myself. When I apply forgiveness to others, I am releasing limitations of my own consciousness. All service is self-service at the deepest level. With all these aspects integrated, James Mitchell had developed a life philosophy that honored both scientific competence and spiritual wisdom, demonstrating that it was possible to live a completely practical life while consciously operating as a channel for the same healing energies that Jesus had demonstrated. His understanding had evolved far beyond healing techniques to a complete vision of how medicine could serve human spiritual awakening when practiced with recognition that every person possesses inherent divine nature capable of miraculous healing. James had truly become a living bridge between old and future medical paradigms, demonstrating through example that Jesus' teachings about healing weren't historical relics, but practical technologies available for rediscovery and application by anyone willing to transcend the limitations of conventional thinking about the separation between science and spirituality. In the years that followed his awakening to Jesus' true healing teachings, James Mitchell discovered that his life had become a living demonstration of possibilities that most medical professionals considered impossible. His expanded capabilities didn't remain secrets guarded in his veterinary clinic, but became natural aspects of how he operated in all areas of his professional life, creating waves of influence that spread far beyond his initial expectations. The most notable change was in how James related to every medical case he attended. Veterinary colleagues and local farmers began to observe that He seemed to have an almost miraculous connection with sick animals and an extraordinary ability to facilitate recoveries that transcended conventional medical explanations. Dr. Mitchell has developed some kind of special gift, commented Tom Morrison, whose animals James had treated for more than a decade. I don't know how to explain it, but animals that are dying suddenly improve when he touches them. It's as if he knows exactly what they need, not just physically, but on deeper levels. But James never publicly revealed the true source of his expanded abilities or his conversations with Cale about Jesus' teachings. Instead, he attributed his successes to holistic approach and attention to emotional aspects of animal health. During the 5 years following his awakening, James began attracting attention from veterinarians from other states, animal owners who traveled hundreds of miles for his services, and even some human doctors who were interested in his apparently intuitive methods of diagnosis and treatment. The secret, he explained during occasional lectures at veterinary conferences, is recognizing that animals like humans possess emotional and energetic dimensions that affect physical health. When we treat the whole animal, not just symptoms, we achieve results that transcend conventional medicine. These presentations had extraordinary impact on veterinary professionals who implemented James's approaches and discovered significant improvements not only in treatment outcomes, but in personal satisfaction with their medical practice. James Mitchell is quietly revolutionizing veterinary medicine, observed Dr. Sarah Collins, a veterinarian from Iowa City, who had studied James' methods for more than 2 years. He demonstrates that when we combine technical competence with genuine compassion and attention to non-physical factors, we achieve results that seem miraculous. But perhaps the most significant impact of James' work was on his own health condition. His autoimmune disease, which had threatened to end his career just a few years before, had stabilized completely and many symptoms had disappeared entirely. It's the most extraordinary recovery I've ever witnessed, admitted Dr. Richard Stevens, the rheumatologist who had treated James for years. I can't medically explain how someone with progressive autoimmune disease can experience such complete reversal of symptoms. James never publicly discussed the specific methods he had used for his own healing, but occasionally shared general insights about the connection between emotional and physical health that resonated deeply with other healthcare professionals. During his conversations with colleagues and patients, James frequently encountered people who seemed to be going through their own awakening moments to the deeper dimensions of healing, without forcing conversations about spirituality. He simply offered perspectives that allowed others to discover truths about self-healing potential. I met Dr. Mitchell during a period when I was struggling with severe depression after my husband's death, shared Martha Peterson, a local farmer. He never tried to counsel me about personal issues, but something about how he talked about healing, how body and soul work together, helped me understand that my emotional pain was affecting my physical health. James's memories of Cale and the revelations about Jesus remain vivid throughout the years, serving as a constant source of inspiration and guidance for his continuing work as an awakened healer. The experience I had fundamentally changed how I see medicine and spirituality. James reflected during an interview for a veterinary magazine 10 years after the encounter. I understood that the separation between science and faith is artificial. Both are exploring different aspects of the same reality. James also discovered he wasn't alone in his mission. Through connections that formed naturally, he connected with dozens of other healthcare professionals around the country who were integrating spiritual principles with medical practice. Doctors who used meditation as a diagnostic tool, nurses who applied healing energy, therapists who recognized spiritual dimensions of trauma. We're all participating in a quiet rediscovery, James observed during an informal meeting of holistically oriented healthcare professionals. Each of us demonstrating that medicine can be simultaneously scientific and spiritual, practical, and transformative. Now, more than 15 years after his encounter with Cale, James Mitchell has established himself as one of the most respected voices in holistic veterinary medicine in the American Midwest. His characteristically humble but extraordinarily effective approach has inspired hundreds of healthcare professionals to expand their own practices beyond purely technical limitations. But his most important legacy is demonstrating that ordinary medical professionals can facilitate extraordinary healing when they understand that every living being possesses inherent capacity for self-healing that can be activated through genuine love, unconditional compassion, and recognition of the divine nature that exists within all life. You who are listening to this story live in a time when awakenings, like James Mitchell's, are becoming increasingly common among healthcare professionals around the world. If you work in the medical field, whether as a doctor, nurse therapist, or any role involving caring for others, if you've ever felt there was more to healing than technical protocols recognize, if you've ever experienced moments when compassionate presence facilitated recovery that transcended medical explanation, James's journey offers confirmation that your perceptions are correct. The central message that emerges from James' extraordinary transformation is simultaneously simple and revolutionary. Your body possesses innate capacity for self-healing when you remove emotional blockages and operate from genuine love for yourself. The teachings Jesus demonstrated about healing weren't unique supernatural miracles, but consciousness technologies that any person can learn to apply. If you're facing health challenges, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, James' story suggests you may be being called to rediscover healing capabilities that exist within you. Every experience of illness is an opportunity to develop deeper understanding about the connection between consciousness and matter. The capabilities James developed perception of energetic dimensions of disease ability to facilitate healing through focused compassion, capacity to integrate science with spirituality aren't special gifts unique to him, but latent potentials that exist within any person genuinely committed to healing service. Remember that transformative encounters like James's experience with Kale aren't random events but aspects of a larger process through which we are gently awakened to understand the divine potential that exists within us. If you feel drawn to approach healing with greater consciousness, if you experience moments of profound compassion when you see suffering, if you have intuitions about connections between emotional states and physical health, this may be a sign that you too are being prepared to rediscover spiritual dimensions of healing. The transformation James experienced from technically competent medical professional to awakened healer who recognizes sacred dimensions of service demonstrates that it's possible to honor both scientific rigor and spiritual wisdom. When we understand that both are exploring different aspects of the same reality, you don't need visitors from other planets or dramatic mystical experiences to awaken to the healing principles Jesus taught. You need only the willingness to apply genuine forgiveness to the resentments you carry, direct, unconditional love toward your own body and well-being, and recognize that you possess inherent divine capacity for healing that transcends the limitations of conventional medicine. The universe is full of opportunities to transform conventional approaches to health into paths of spiritual awakening. Your preparation for this transformation can begin simply through more conscious attention to the quality of love and compassion you direct toward yourself and others, and willingness to consider that true healing always involves integration of body, mind, and spirit. You are living during a period where truths about the spiritual nature of healing are being rediscovered by people in all areas of health and wellness. The only question that remains is, are you ready to discover that the healing capabilities Jesus demonstrated weren't unique miracles, but consciousness technologies available for rediscovery by any person willing to transcend the artificial separation between science and spirituality? And you who have just heard this extraordinary story about rediscovering Jesus's true healing teachings, have you had experiences where love and compassion facilitated healing that transcended conventional medical explanation? Have you felt that your body responds to the quality of your thoughts and emotions in ways that traditional medicine doesn't recognize? Leave in the comments your own experiences with moments when spiritual and physical healing met. You may discover you carry more potential or self-healing than you imagine. If this story about rediscovering the healing technologies Jesus taught resonated deeply with something within you, subscribe to Stories Beyond and activate the bell to not miss other revelations that explore how authentic spiritual teachings can transform our understanding of health disease and human potential. And share this video with people who are seeking true healing and ready to discover that the divine power Jesus demonstrated resides within each one of us. Remember, in a universe where every person possesses inherent divine nature and capacity for self-healing through unconditional love, the only limits to experiencing miraculous healing are those you choose to accept about your own potential to access and apply the principles Jesus tried to teach all humanity.